Welcome. You have shared some truly compelling source material for us to examine today. We are looking at a case that sent shockwaves not just through Australia, but across the Tasman Sea and into New Zealand. We're talking about the 2002 murder of Janelle Patton on Norfolk Island. This is a story of one person's earnest search for a new, peaceful life, which ended instead in, well, unimaginable tragedy. And it's all set against a backdrop of historic tranquility that, as it turns out, masked a pretty brutal reality.
The historic tranquility it's really the crucial context here. The records we have present a meticulously documented account of a crime that just fundamentally disturbed the sense of absolute security held by the island's small population.
Right.
You see, the murder of Janelle Patton was, historically speaking, the first documented homicide on Norfolk Island since the year 1893.
1893.
Yeah, think about that time frame. Over a century of peace just shattered instantly. So our aim here is to move through these documents and conduct a really in-depth exploration to understand the victim's journey, the precise facts of the crime, the investigation's many logistical challenges, and then the judicial resolution that finally followed 4 years later. We will, of course, approach this sensitive material with the seriousness and respect it demands, focusing entirely on the facts we've been given.
Okay, so to set the scene, let's begin with Janelle Patton herself. She was 29 years old, born in Sydney, and she had relocated to Norfolk Island, which, for anyone unfamiliar, is an Australian territory. It's geographically situated in the southwest Pacific, sort of northwest of New Zealand. The general atmosphere of the island at that time was defined by an extreme rarity of violent crime. But it was a fact often marketed to tourists and really cherished by the residents. It was meant to be a refuge, which just makes what happened next all the more jarring. So let's unpack the motivation behind her move. It wasn't simply a desire for a change of scenery, not at all. The records clearly indicate that Janelle's decision to leave the mainland and move to Norfolk Island in her late 20s was driven by a profound dissatisfaction and really depression about her life in Sydney. She'd explicitly told various people that she wanted to get away from what she described as the chaos and the complexity of life in a big city. This wasn't just a geographical move. It was a desperate quest for emotional and personal renewal.
And that impulse to get away really speaks to a deep level of personal turbulence and trauma, really, that she was trying to escape. She was looking for isolation and safety. The records detail her specific hopes for a fresh start. Not only professionally, she found work quickly in the hotel sector, but particularly in her private life. Her history had been marred by what are described as a number of failed and tumultuous relationships back in Sydney. And this wasn't just, simple heartbreak. The severity of this past trauma is underlined by the explicit mention of one abusive ex-boyfriend who had actually broken her jaw.
Wow.
So her decision to seek out one of the safest, most isolated communities in the region was a really earnest attempt to just reset her entire life. She was hoping that the distance and the calm of Norfolk Island would provide the safe haven she desperately needed.
Her relocation seems to have been executed quite swiftly, too, which just reinforces that sense of urgency you mentioned. The accounts note that she secured both an apartment and a job, working at one of the island's hotels during a brief preparatory trip. It really suggests a determined commitment to make this new life work. But unfortunately, the island reality didn't immediately match her aspirations for complete peace. The documents suggest that disappointment continued in her dating life on the island. So even though she had sought this sanctuary, she encountered similar interpersonal conflicts to those she tried to leave behind.
Right. It followed her.
This disappointment escalated into tense confrontations, including one specific incident where the angry girlfriend of a man Patton was allegedly dating reportedly slapped her across the face.
It's a sad detail, isn't it? It just shows that even in a highly isolated community with a tiny population, the complexities of human relationships, drama, and conflict, they persist.
Yeah. The island, despite its physical distance from the mainland, it just didn't offer complete escape from emotional turmoil for her.
It's critically important here to establish the timeline immediately before the murder, because it just underscores how quickly all her future plans were just extinguished. Janelle's parents arrived from mainland Australia just 1 day prior to her murder.
1 day.
Yeah, they were staying at a nearby hotel while she remained in her apartment. The materials note that it remains unclear why her parents didn't stay with her. Perhaps it was the small size of her island accommodation, but that's a minor detail. What's important is that Janelle was clearly looking forward to their visit. She had specific plans to take them to lunch the very next day. And that detail emphasizes that she was actively planning her immediate future, looking forward to connecting with her family, moments before her life was cut short.
Focusing now on the day of the disappearance, Sunday, March 31st, 2002. Patton was last observed that morning. She was going on what was described as her usual walk along a coastal track near her home before she had a scheduled shift at the hotel. So this suggests a known, predictable routine. She was also captured on CCTV from a local grocery store at some point that morning, which provides a definitive point in time when she was still alive, engaged in typical daily errands. The agreement was solid. She would stop by to pick up her parents by 1:00 p.m. for their lunch. That time came, and it went. She failed to show up. And crucially, she didn't attempt to contact them or anyone else, which was immediately alarming to her parents.
Of course.
In a small, close-knit community like Norfolk Island, where routines are so often strictly observed, an unexplained deviation like that from a firm plan, it would instantly raise red flags, especially given her parents had traveled so far to see her.
And the alarm bells did go off very quickly. Because of her unexpected failure to appear, her parents, showing just immense and immediate concern, began searching that very afternoon. They knew instinctively this wasn't normal behavior for their daughter.
They knew something was wrong.
Exactly. So they contacted one of her colleagues and her landlady, trying to trace her last known movements, but neither of them had seen Patton since that morning's sightings. And given the total size and population of Norfolk Island, a thorough, informal search can be done very quickly.
You can cover a lot of ground.
You can. So when these initial local checks yielded no results as the evening drew in, the situation escalated rapidly from concern to, well, full-blown panic. When they received no news, no indication of her whereabouts as the evening progressed, they made the difficult decision to report her missing later that evening at the police station. And that initiated the formal investigation that would just shatter the island's perception of its own safety.
The wait for news was tragically short. Soon after the Pattons reported their daughter missing, their worst fears were confirmed. Early the next morning, a woman's body matching Janelle's general description was discovered, this time by 2 tourists visiting from New Zealand.
So it wasn't even police who found her?
No. And the transition from a missing person inquiry to a major homicide investigation was immediate. And for the family and that small island community, absolutely devastating.
The location of the discovery is a crucial and deeply unsettling detail. It gives us immediate insight into the crimes movement. The body was found at the Cockpit Waterfall Reserve. And what makes this so geographically significant is that this reserve sits at the opposite end of the island from where Janelle was last seen on her morning walk.
The opposite end, so she was moved.
She was definitely moved. We aren't talking about a short distance. The source materials really emphasize that she was either abducted or transported a considerable distance across the island after she disappeared, which implies the definite use of a vehicle.
Right.
This movement from the site of the attack or abduction to that remote reserve, it indicates a level of planning and concealment. It differentiates it sharply from some spontaneous crime committed near her home. The location itself was remote, chosen perhaps for its isolation and the difficulty of discovery, away from the settled areas of the island.
The handling of the crime scene and the subsequent identification demonstrates the immediate need to protect the family from more trauma. The body was discovered wrapped in a large black plastic sheet.
Mm-hmm.
This act of wrapping and concealing the body again points toward the perpetrator having some time and presence of mind to try and hide the evidence and delay identification.
Yeah.
And to spare Janelle's parents this unimaginable distress, it was Janelle's landlady who bravely undertook the heartbreaking task of formally identifying the body.
That's awful. What a thing to have to do.
It is. And this specific detail just underscores the unique burdens placed on individuals within this tiny community in the wake of such a horrendous event. We really have to pause here and acknowledge the severity and the cruelty of this moment, extending profound sympathy for Janelle Patton, who was murdered so far from the safe haven she was seeking, and for the enduring pain inflicted upon her family by this violent, senseless act.
And the immediate findings from the medical examiners provided shocking, stark evidence of the brutality and the sustained nature of the attack. This evidence would later be absolutely pivotal in securing the conviction. They concluded, based on the defensive wounds, that Patton fought extensively and fiercely for her life.
She fought back.
She fought back hard. The description of her injuries details clear defensive wounds primarily located on her hands. Critically, she had attempted to grab the killer's blade in a desperate effort to stop the assault. This resulted in her thumb being nearly severed from her hand.
Oh, that's just horrific.
It is, and that detail speaks volumes. It doesn't just indicate a struggle, it confirms a prolonged, harrowing fight for survival she endured in those final moments. It confirms her resistance and provides direct forensic evidence linking the attacker to the weapon.
The records enumerate the catalog of grievous wounds documented by the examiners. It paints a picture of an assault that was savage, frenzied, and prolonged. It suggests a level of rage, that is. It's just difficult to comprehend. To truly understand the extent of the violence and the prolonged nature of the assault, we should note the specific findings. She suffered a broken pelvis and a broken ankle. Injuries consistent with severe blunt force trauma or being forcefully run over or slammed with great force against an object.
Okay.
She sustained a fractured skull, indicating a heavy blow to the head. And astonishingly, she was stabbed over 65 times across her body.
65 times.
That sheer number of stab wounds just fundamentally moves the act out of the realm of accidental manslaughter and firmly into the territory of sustained extreme violence.
No question.
The fatal wound was identified as a stab to the chest that punctured her lung. That was the direct cause of her death. And in one of the most horrific details documented in the sources, she was stabbed with such great force that the implement passed through her eyeball.
This level of violence and injury it's just overwhelming evidence of a sustained high-intensity attack.
Absolutely.
Furthermore, forensic analysis of the immediate scene yielded several pieces of trace evidence crucial for the investigation, even if they initially complicated theories about the precise sequence of events. Various shards of broken glass, plastic fragments, and sand were found embedded in her hair and on her body.
Sand, okay.
The presence of sand is particularly relevant given the coastal nature of the island and the presumed movement of the body by vehicle. The overall covering of bruises and these foreign materials led the medical examiners to conclude that she was struck repeatedly with a heavy, blunt object. They theorized it could have been a glass bottle, which might be the source of the green glass fragments, or a metallic pole, in addition to the extensive stab wounds from a knife or blade.
So, multiple weapons, or at least multiple types of assault.
Exactly. It indicates a complex crime sequence involving both blunt force trauma and sharp force trauma, which demanded the investigation follow multiple lines of inquiry based on all this scattered forensic evidence left at the discovery site.
Despite the immediate shock, the gravity of the crime, and this wealth of forensic evidence detailing the victim's struggle, the investigation proved to be exceptionally protracted and difficult. It took a significant amount of time, 4 full years to resolve.
4 years.
Which really highlights the inherent challenges of conducting complex, high-stakes forensic work and an investigation in an isolated jurisdiction like Norfolk Island. It just lacked the infrastructure and the sheer manpower of a major metropolitan police force.
Right. So the Australian Federal Police, the AFP, they were brought in to manage this complex homicide inquiry. And the AFP investigation ultimately hinged on meticulously cross-referencing and processing 3 main pieces of forensic evidence recovered from the scene, even as they struggled with the case's complexity for 4 years. These were the foundational pillars of their pursuit, and their successful analysis really showcases the power of patient police work.
So what were they?
Well, first, Janelle's defensive wounds. They established her struggle and provided the possibility of trace DNA evidence or fiber evidence from the killer. Second, that large black plastic sheet the body was wrapped in, an item that was meticulously analyzed to try and trace its origin or specific usage, suggesting a deliberate effort to conceal or move the body.
Okay.
And third, the pieces of green glass found embedded in her hair. That pointed toward a specific type of weapon or blunt object used in the attack, potentially a broken bottle of a particular type found on the island. So these 3 pieces of evidence, the physical interaction, the concealment method, and the specific material evidence, they were the pillars supporting that long-term cross-jurisdictional investigation.
And that 4-year mark finally brought the necessary breakthrough, and it required international cooperation with New Zealand authorities. On February 1st, 2006, an arrest was finally made. The perpetrator was identified as Glenn Peter Charles McNeil, a 28-year-old chef from New Zealand who had been living and working on Norfolk Island at the time of the murder.
So he wasn't a local islander?
No. And critically, he wasn't arrested on Norfolk Island where the crime occurred, but near the city of Nelson on the South Island of New Zealand.
Yeah.
He had left the territory sometime after the murder.
Right.
And this detail confirms that McNeil wasn't immediately tied to the crime, and that the investigation tracked his existence and whereabouts across the Tasman Sea, identifying him through forensic means and just persistent detective work. He was subsequently extradited back to Norfolk Island to face formal charges.
McNeil's initial statements immediately introduced a significant contradiction into the case that would later form the central axis of his defense, and it flew directly in the face of the forensic reality. At the Norfolk Island Court of Petty Sessions, he provided an account that drastically differed from the nature of the crime scene.
What did he say?
He claimed that on the day of the murder, he had smoked marijuana and that he had accidentally run over Janelle Patton with his car.
Accidentally ran her over.
Yes. This statement suggested a scenario of reckless manslaughter, an accident followed by panic and concealment, rather than the sustained, frenzied murder evidenced by 65 stab wounds and blunt force trauma.
Okay.
So the defense would later attempt to argue that the initial concealment and movement of the body were driven by panic after an accidental collision. But it is vital to note that he later retracted the statement entirely.
He took it back.
Completely. And that set the stage for a dramatic and highly contested trial where the defense would challenge the admissibility and the veracity of this initial admission, claiming it was tainted by his mental state at the time.
Following his arrest and initial appearance on Norfolk Island, McNeil had to be transferred off the island for high-security incarceration and preparation for the trial. The logistical necessity of this is pretty clear, given the lack of specialized maximum security correctional facilities on the territory.
Of course.
The records confirm he was moved to Silverwater Correctional Center in Sydney, which just suggests the complexities involved in holding a high-profile suspect in a remote jurisdiction while preparing for a major trial in the Australian court system.
The formal trial against McNeil began precisely 1 year after his arrest on February 1st, 2007. And the location of the trial presented a truly unique legal challenge. It really required special measures. It highlights the intersection of colonial law and modern justice, really. Given that Norfolk Island is an extremely small and isolated territory, it has a severely limited potential jury pool.
Right, everyone knows everyone.
Exactly. Most residents would likely know the victim, the defendant, or key witnesses. So, to ensure the integrity and fairness of the process, Chief Justice Mark Weinberg imposed a strict press blackout on the proceedings while the jury was being selected.
A press blackout. That's unusual.
Very unusual. This measure was explicitly done to prevent media coverage and outside influence from potentially polluting or diluting that tiny jury pool. It was safeguarding the possibility of an impartial jury being formed from the small local population, a measure rarely implemented in modern Australian jurisprudence, but entirely necessary in this context.
Then, during the trial, on March 1st, 2007, McNeil took the stand in the Supreme Court and completely reversed his earlier admission. It was a move clearly designed to cast maximum doubt on the prosecution's narrative. He stated unequivocally, "I did not kill Janelle Patton, I did not abduct her, and I did not see Janelle Patton that day."
A complete 180.
A total reversal. He directly contradicted the detailed narrative he provided to police a year earlier about hitting her with his car. And when he was questioned about these contradictory initial statements, he tried to attribute them to his mental health problems at the time of the confession. He argued he was in a vulnerable state where he would have admitted to anything just to end the interview or the stress of the process.
That's a difficult position for the jury.
It is. It placed the 11-person jury in a complex and unenviable position. They were forced to weigh a detailed initial confession against this compelling retraction supported by claims of mental distress. And ultimately, they had to rely heavily on the objective forensic evidence that just spoke volumes about the sheer violence involved.
Right. And despite the defendant's retraction and the defense's reliance on his poor mental state, the trial concluded on March 9th, 2007, when the jury returned a guilty verdict. The prosecution's success was firmly grounded in that strong, undeniable physical and forensic evidence they'd collected over 4 years. Evidence that overwhelmingly contradicted the initial accidental running over story.
The 65 stab wounds.
Exactly. The 65 stab wounds and the broken bone just could not be reconciled with the car accident scenario. However, even with the conviction, the records highlight that 2 significant ambiguities remained unresolved, though apparently they weren't critical enough to sway the jury.
What were they?
First, the question of motive remained entirely unclear. The judicial process did not establish a definitive reason for the crime, leaving the why unanswered. And second, and this is crucial, unidentified female DNA was found on the victim's body.
Unidentified female DNA.
Yes, the origin of which was not explained during the trial. These lingering questions, while not sufficient to create reasonable doubt for the jury, given the overwhelming forensic proof of McNeil's involvement, they certainly added layers of complexity to the public and legal understanding of the case.
The sentencing followed several months later. This allowed the court time to consider the full impact and severity of the crime. On July 25, 2007, Chief Justice Weinberg handed down the punishment. McNeil was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Given the brutality and the prolonged nature of the attack, this sentence reflected the need for strong retribution and denouncement of the violence against Janelle Patton. And demonstrating the logistical and jurisdictional intricacies of the case, the sentencing itself was conducted in the Supreme Court of Norfolk Island. But the court was sitting remotely in Sydney, Australia.
Right. Another one of those logistical details that just underscores the special legal relationship between the small territory and the mainland Australian justice system.
Exactly.
But the guilty verdict was far from the final judicial word. The defense immediately began the protracted appeal process to overturn the conviction. McNeil appealed to a full court of the Federal Court of Australia. And the central argument put forward by his defense team focused intensely on the inadmissibility of his initial detailed statement to police.
The car accident story.
That's the one, where he admitted to hitting Patton with his car. The defense contended that this statement should have been excluded from evidence, given his later claims about his mental health issues and instability at the time of the confession. They argued that allowing that retracted and potentially unreliable statement to be used unfairly prejudiced the jury.
I see.
But the full court, consisting of Chief Justice Black and Justices Lander and Bisonko, they reviewed the evidence exhaustively and ultimately dismissed his appeal. They upheld the original trial's findings, especially when that statement was contrasted by the irrefutable physical evidence.
And the legal fight continued, pursuing the case to the highest level of the Australian judicial system, the High Court of Australia. This marks the last possible avenue for appeal within the Australian framework. On November 14, 2008, the High Court delivered its final decision on the matter. The court refused special leave for further appeal.
So that was it.
That was it. This action effectively exhausted all avenues within the Australian legal system and finalized the conviction against Glenn Peter Charles McNeil. This decision legally cemented his guilt and the 24-year sentence, ensuring that the judicial resolution of the case reached its final conclusion nearly 7 years after the crime occurred. It provided at least a measure of finality for Janelle Patton's family.
Regarding the conclusion of the sentence, the most recent update in the records provides the final official closure for the judicial process concerning the convicted individual. Glenn Peter Charles McNeil was released on January 31, 2024. He had served the requisite time period of his sentence eligible for release under Australian law.
And because he was a New Zealand citizen.
Exactly. Reflecting that fact, upon his release, he was immediately deported to his home country, New Zealand. This official act marks the physical conclusion of his involvement in the crime and the punishment delivered by the Australian legal system. It closes the book on his physical presence in the territory and in Australia.
It's important to just reflect briefly on the profound media attention this case generated, especially considering the rarity of such a violent crime in that jurisdiction, a place that was, as we established, historically devoid of murder for over a century. This event resonated widely in true crime circles across Australia and beyond. It really demonstrates the public fascination with crimes that shatter the myth of perfect safety in remote, idyllic locations. The case has been examined repeatedly. It was covered by Crime Investigation Australia in 2009, featured on the widely listened to Case File True Crime podcast in 2016, and discussed by true crime content creator Bella Fiore in 2021. This sustained media coverage ensures that the specifics of the Janelle Patton murder, from the initial shock to the final appeals, remain a recognized and often studied part of the region's judicial and social history.
In reviewing this entire body of material, we can reflect on the most significant aspects of this analysis. First and foremost, the stark contrast between Norfolk Island's historically peaceful nature and the sheer brutality and duration of the crime is. It's the most enduring shock of the case.
Absolutely. Janelle Patton sought refuge in a new beginning, driven by a history of trauma, only to meet a violent end that fundamentally altered the perception of safety for an entire community. Furthermore, the conviction relied incredibly heavily on how advanced forensic methods were employed, identifying the precise nature of the defensive wounds, tracing the origin of the black sheet, analyzing the shards of green glass.
All those crucial elements.
Right. They were crucial in successfully solving a murder 4 years after the fact.
This forensic certainty stood firm despite the defendant's wildly conflicting statements and those lingering questions about both motive and the unexplained female DNA. This case serves as a powerful illustration of the complexity inherent in prosecuting a high-profile, isolated crime and the absolute necessity of rigorous, patient forensic science in achieving justice. We've thoroughly reviewed the official record and the outcome of the judicial process, which hinged so significantly on the forensic evidence contradicting the defendant's changing accounts. This brings us to a final, complex question for you to contemplate, one that often sits at the heart of justice systems globally. Considering the importance of that initial police statement where McNeil admitted to an involvement, even if he minimized the violence, a statement he later claimed was coerced or unreliable due to severe mental health issues. How crucial is it for courts to accurately weigh a defendant's mental state at the exact time of their first admission? Does the subsequent overwhelming independent evidence of guilt entirely negate the validity of the procedural claims regarding that initial statement? Or does that initial potential coercion remain a complex layer of justice that the court must always resolve? It's a compelling point about where legal procedure and mental health intersect in the pursuit of truth. Thank you for sharing these sources with us and allowing us to explore this material in such depth.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.